Welcome back to the Hopeless Car Guy. In this series where I talk about my own history as a car guy, where we're reaching the point where cars are starting to stack up in the driveway. And the latest addition is a 1977 Dodge Aspen. It was a 318 automatic car, and this car seemed better than most people give them credit for, although this one had fuel issues. The arm for the mechanical fuel pump had been broken, presumably because someone had tried to put the pump in wrong, and it was using a cheap inline electric fuel pump. But both the pump and the filter kept clogging up because of a large amount of sediment in the fuel tank. Tried to flush it out a number of times, but in the end I had to replace the fuel tank, which led me to discover that it was an early production model because apparently they changed fuel tanks mid-year. But once that was resolved, it was a nice driving car, and this would end up being one of 8 vehicles that we either sold or passed on to our kids when we moved out of state. But long before that happened, I picked up another motorcycle, this one from a friend, and it was a bit of a Frankenbike. It was built from spare parts from a number of other bikes. The majority of the parts came from 3 different VX 920s. The handlebars and forks came from a 750 Virago, and the turn signals came off of some form of Enduro. It had an aftermarket bearing with a mini windshield on it, and was about 3 different colors when I got it. The bike had no baffles, just hollowed out mufflers with mesh welded on the end. Eventually I sanded the thing down and painted it light blue, to which I was advised that light blue is not a proper color for a masculine motorcycle, when I traded the thing to my brother, who used the running gear for his single-seat mini sandrail. Adding to the parking lot was a 1988 Mazda B2200 pickup that we got from some other friends of ours. It was a 2-wheel drive, 5-speed, extended cab, had a canopy on it, and a cargo rack. We didn't have it long before it blew a head gasket, so we picked up a B2000 4-wheel drive that my brother's brother-in-law had been using for racing. But we didn't get around to doing any of the swap before we moved out of state, so these vehicles also got sold. The motorcycle I had traded to my brother for, surprise, surprise, a car. A car that my kids could use as a commuter car. A 1991 Plymouth Acclaim. It was a filthy, abused car. Like most cars of this period, the paint had already started to peel. And although the car was about as uninteresting as any car could ever be, we didn't really have any problems with it the whole time that we owned it, other than the fact that by the time we did get rid of it, there was virtually no paint left on it. And this too would be one of the cars that we sold when we moved. And when we moved, we sold virtually every vehicle that we had and started over from scratch at the new location. And the first car at the new location would be my dad's 1996 Chrysler Sebring LXi Coupe, which is essentially a Mitsubishi Galant with Chrysler styling. My dad had had the car for 8 years when we got it, and shortly after we got it from him, it started a nasty habit of the sensors going bad, but once the majority of those were replaced, it proved to be a good car. Over the time that we had it, we put more aggressive rubber on it, and a wing off of a Z24 Cavalier that I picked up at a swap meet for $5. And we also had it for about 8 years before passing it on to our kids. The next vehicle we got from my wife's dad that he had bought new. A 2002 Dodge Caravan V6, silver. This car was so generic that one day I came out of work and there were 3 identical ones parked in a row. So I added a set of J.C. Whitney stripes down the side to help identify it. We typically had the middle row of seats out of it, using the side doors for cargo instead of the rear. And our youngest son really seemed to appreciate having the back end of the vehicle by himself with all that open space. On one of our many road trips in this vehicle, we discovered that the cruise control had a maximum limit at 90 miles an hour, which, quite frankly, is more than enough for a minivan. After the power steering pump went bad, the wife decided that we should just sell it, as we needed some extra cash, and it wasn't long before we saw it running around town as a taxi cab. Of course, by this time, I was chomping at the bit for another motorcycle, so I picked up a project bike for $50, a Yamaha Seika 750. It was a bit of an unusual bike, with the master cylinder behind the square headlight, plastic covers over the handlebars, and digital instrumentation. It had been sitting in the sun so long that half the bike had faded to pink. It was a carbureted inline 4, and when I'd pulled the carburetors apart, the gasoline had been sitting in there so long they looked like it was full of dead jellyfish more than any kind of fuel. Pulled all the plastic digital stuff off, added a round headlight, analog gauges, different handlebars, replaced the rear fender with a hidden piece, and repainted it magic black and root beer brown. But after a couple of years of piecing it together, I got impatient and sold it and bought another bike. which I will come back to in a few minutes. After we sold the minivan, we got another vehicle from the wife's dad that he bought new. This time a 2003 Ford Ranger Extended Cab XLT FX4 with the 4-liter V6. The wife's nephew had been driving it the last few years, and it was kind of in rough shape. The handle to the tailgate was broke off, and the inside panel to the tailgate was just laying in the bed. It had a plastic bed liner. The center console was broken, which we replaced with one out of a Mazda that we picked up out of a scrapyard. The interior smelled like a stoned wet dog, so we ripped the carpet out and replaced it with a rubber mat. And at about 150,000 miles, the plastic thermostat housing cracked, and it blew a head gasket. So we replaced the engine with a much lower mileage version we picked up out of a scrapyard. At some point, we upgraded the wheels and tires, but at this point, we've had the thing for over a decade, and really the biggest problems we've had with it is that most of the dash lights are burnt out and they're practically impossible to get to, and the clips that hold the cruise control buttons to the steering wheel are broke. About the time that we passed the Sebring on to the kids, we decided it was about time to buy new again. We were looking for an economy car, and as usual, we spent several months test driving everything in sight. Kia Soul, Mazda 3, Fiat 500, but apparently demanding a manual transmission and some facsimile of performance was a sin because it didn't seem that anything was equipped the way we wanted within a 500-mile radius. But while at the Honda dealership, hoping to find a manual transmission fit, the wife instead picked out a Civic Si Coupe. Seems she had no choice, as not only was it manual, it was black. We had this car for about 4.5 years. The only thing we did to it was put on some nice valve stem covers, and it was a cute little fun-to-drive car that we enjoyed. But at this point, it was becoming clear that we were not small car kind of people, and it took us a whole day's worth of effort to sell the thing, suggesting we could have got more for it if we were willing to put in the effort. Besides, who needs an economy car when you have a motorcycle, especially when motorcycles have free downtown parking? So I picked up a Suzuki Intruder 1400. When I went to look at it, there was actually a row of people standing around hoping to purchase it. But money talks, particularly when it's cash in hand. The handlebars were pushed too far forward, presumably because the previous owner was a fan of ape hangers, but that's an easy adjustment. The shocks, however, on this bike were not adjustable, which was disappointing because the front was too stiff and the back was too soft. And really nothing on this bike seemed to be designed to be worked on. And one evening while traveling down the highway, I heard something rubbing. First I thought maybe the saddlebags had moved and were rubbing on the back tire. But when that proved not to be the case, I pulled over to see if I could isolate the problem. And it turned out that the battery had fallen out the bottom and was being dragged down the pavement by the cables a fraction of an inch in front of the back tires. And it had ground off just enough that there was no fluid in it anymore, so restarting the bike was an impossibility. And I still have this bike, but that is subject to change in the near future. And I still have other vehicles that I haven't discussed in these videos, but those will come at another time. As always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment below and like and subscribe. Thanks.